Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. I just purchased this new bike, and today we are going to take this crankset off, take this bottom bracket out, and give it a good thorough clean, give it a good thorough inspection, and we're going to talk about how we get these old bottom brackets off. This is an older series, comes with the Octalink style bottom bracket, which means this arm and the other arm are, they both come off, and the bottom bracket is like a sealed cartridge system. It's really similar to what you see on the square tapered ones on a lot of cheaper bikes nowadays. You don't really see the Octalink anymore, but we're going to go ahead and take this thing off and give it a good clean, good inspection and put it back together. First thing we're going to do is just take this first bolt off. It can be on here pretty tight. And it's going to be threaded normally, so just lefty-loosey. Now let's take a look inside there. So as you can see inside here, there are 8 splines. That's why they call it the Octalink. And then there's this big threaded hole in the middle. What happens when you install this crank arm onto this bottom bracket is the bolt, seen right here, threads into the inside of the bottom bracket spindle, and then it pulls on these tabs and actually presses the bottom bracket on, presses the crank arm onto that bottom bracket. And even when you take this bolt back out, it's really hard to get this crank arm back off. And one thing you may notice is that here on the actual crank arm are some threads. And that is for our special crank puller, seen right here. Alright, so this crank puller has a end that moves like this. And what we do with this piece is it threads into the crank arm itself with those threads, and then this piece threads into our fitting, and it actually pushes on that bottom bracket until it pops off of the pops the crank arm off of that bottom bracket. So they call this a crank puller. This particular one has a large side for the Octalink and a smaller side for the square tapered, so it's going to work for either one. All right, now we're going to thread the tool in. You want to make sure that your press tool is all the way retracted, and then we're going to thread this in delicately. These threads are aluminum, and you want to be really careful that you don't destroy them. You also want to be careful that you're using the appropriate fitting for your bottom bracket. If you're using that square tapered and you try and use this larger Octalink fitting, it's definitely going to rip out all the threads on your crank arm, and you're going to have a real tough time getting that back out. So now I've got this just hand tightened in. Perfectly fine to just hand tighten it in, and we are going to thread that on. All right, now all we got to do is just tighten it up. It's going to take a fair amount of force to get this thing moving. And again, keep an eye on this portion right here, because if you start pulling these threads out because you're pushing not on the bottom bracket spindle but rather on the inside of that crank, you're going to have a really bad time actually getting this crank arm off. All right, there we go. Now we're going to do the same thing for the non-drive side. Again, with these crank arm fixing bolts, these are going to be normal threaded, so you don't have to worry about any kind of reverse thread. All right, now that we have both cranks off, let's take a look at this bottom bracket itself here. This is the non-drive side, and it has 2 different methods. It's got one that's got this sort of specialty wrench, looks like a 8-spline wrench to remove it, but that's not what we're going to use. We are going to use one of these right here. This one grabs on the inside of that ring. Now, the most common type of threaded bottom bracket is the BSA, or the British threaded bottom bracket. And on the British standard, which is what this is, and what most of the threaded bottom brackets you see are, the two sides are threaded opposite each other. And the non-drive side in this case is going to be threaded normally, and the drive side is going to be threaded backwards. And you always want to start with that non-drive side. The way I like to remember which direction the left and right are threaded is it's just opposite of whatever your pedals are. So everybody knows that your drive side pedals are threaded normally. That means your non-drive side crank is threaded normally. So let's get this thing off of here. Sometimes it might take a lot of force to break this free. These things, they're put on with a whole lot of force, and they sit for a long time. So it may be that you need to get a nice big breaker arm and put it on the ground so you can get some good leverage. I'm just going to do it on the bench here and see what happens. All right, and you see this side comes off and it's not actually connected to anything. It's just kind of a retaining side. We're going to flip the bike around and take the rest of the bottom bracket out. All right, so now we're on the right hand side, and it's important to remember that because the left side, or the non-drive side, was threaded normally, this side is going to be threaded backwards. So we're going to need to turn it right in order to, or clockwise, in order to loosen it. All right, let's get this thing cleaned up and see how it looks. All right, now that I've got this thing out of here and I've got everything cleaned up, taking a look at this, it actually is in really fantastic shape for how old this is. There's no play, everything is moving very freely, there's no noise, there's no grittiness. So we're just going to put this right back in the way we found it. Just like always, we want to put a little dab of grease on the threads. This little grease is just going to make our job a little easier next time when it comes time to take this thing back off. And just like before, because this is the drive side, we need to remember that it is reverse threaded. So we need to thread it counterclockwise to tighten. Now that we're back on the non-drive side, we're going to thread this normally. So righty-tighty. Now it's time to put the cranks back on. When it comes to putting these cranks on, the reason that they fit so tightly is because there is the slightest little taper to this and the slightest little taper to this. And when you press it on there, it gives a very, very good solid hold. There's a lot of argument online on whether it's best to put some grease on here or not. I don't typically put any grease on there. I just make sure everything is really, really clean because this is a very snug fit, and if you've got any kind of dirt or grit inside there, you might hear it when you pedal. It might make a little bit of noise. All right, everybody, that is our video. I want to thank you all for joining me today. If you like the video, please like it. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. And if there's anything else you'd like to see, just put it in the comments and hopefully I'll be able to make a video soon. Thanks for watching.